maybe a tiny bit more expensive, but can guarantee ethical behavior? Which one would you rather work with? So similarly, if I were to say, hey, Andreas, I'd like to introduce you to David. He's super smart, but he has no integrity. You'd say, why are you wasting my time? Versus if I said, Andreas, I'd like to introduce you to David, not the world's brightest guy, but honest as the day is long. Of course, you'd say, yeah, happy to meet David, right? This is it. Well, none of us want to work with people who don't have that sort of integrity. And I think the same will come into play for startups and technology startups in particular. And I think, by the way, this gives a particular advantage to European startups today, because they can start from day one with all of these philosophies enshrined in how the company is built. From day one, you're an ethics-first company. I think that no doubt they'll get even stronger, but there's strong regulations in place in Europe that will help drive home the need for this ethical behavior. But I think there's also very strong appreciation in, I think, among younger folks in general, everywhere, that these are important factors to consider.
Shomit, I would like now to shift our focus a bit, and I'd like to shift it towards a topic that's actually really close to our heart here at the European VC, and that is collaboration between European and American VCs. Not many VCs have been in the business as long as you have, and especially considering that the European VC industry is actually younger than its American counterpart. So maybe let's start with a general question. Do you have any good advice to our listeners around collaborating across the Atlantic?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of collaboration, period. And that's because of the realization, I think, that markets are always global. And in fact, the most successful US startups are completely global and were global from day one. None of them restricted themselves merely to regional dominance. So if you're going to set out to be very successful, by definition, you need to be global. For you to be global, you need to understand how things work in the rest of the world. None of us is so smart, at least I know I'm not, that I know exactly how things work in every part of the world. So the best way for me to acquire that knowledge is to work with people who are knowledgeable and can complement what I know. So I think the collaboration is implied in building a successful enterprise.
If we now laser focus into Europe, so to speak, I'm asking this mostly because I want to have your take based on your experience in collaborating with the European ecosystem. What do you see is most important to promote a stronger European VC ecosystem? Because something we've been realized, even through some of our interviews with some of our guests, is that European VCs and even LPs tend to be very country focused rather than having, let's say, a pan-European approach. And so do you have any thoughts on how this situation could be mitigated?
Yeah, I think it needs to go beyond pan-European and really be pan-global, basically. For any company to succeed, it has to be global. It has to be global on day one. Here in California, I think California is the world's 5th largest economy. And of course, the U.S. is the world's largest economy. If any startup came in and said merely, I'm going to dominate the world's 5th largest economy, California, or dominate the U.S., we would show them the door because they're not thinking broadly enough. They're not thinking strategically. We want them from day one to think we're going to be a global presence. We're going to have a dominating presence in our markets worldwide. So I think that same philosophy needs to be applied in every region. So it doesn't matter if you're a European company or an Asian company or African company, wherever you may be from, you need to be thinking about how can my product be impactful worldwide. And by having that from the very beginning, you lay the groundwork for actually being successful worldwide. My advice and counsel to investors and entrepreneurs everywhere is to plan on that global domination from day one.
This is very much to the startup development and so what goes on in the targets, you might call them, for VCs. But what would be your perspective on the VCs' ways of doing business? And I might even put you on the spot here because you're right on Sand Hill Road. And are you globally oriented? Are you looking as much on Indian, Chinese, European startups as startups made in your backyard?
I think this is something that needs to happen more and more. We are facing both challenges and opportunities that are global in nature. And I don't think that any region by itself will be able to optimally address any of those challenges or opportunities. So going forward, I think that this needs to be more and more an onus for investors. There may even be a factor here of COVID-19, whereas in the past, investment decisions were made based on face-to-face meetings between entrepreneurs and investors. And that gave a bias towards entrepreneurs who were geographically co-located with the investors. But under COVID-19, with the enforced social distancing, it's as easy for me to meet with a startup from the other part of the world as it might be from one who's just down the street. So in this way, COVID-19 actually might bring the benefit of helping to democratize the process of access to capital. I think there's only benefit in the democratization, the asset of knowledge, and just the understanding that genius is global, people are smart everywhere. How can we make capital equally accessible to people no matter where they may be, so that we can find those entrepreneurs who have the best solutions and the most passion?
I have to follow up on this, and it's just to hammer home a point that I hope you will end up making, which is in Europe, we're seeing a lot of VC funds requiring companies to relocate if they invest. What would be your perspective on this? Is this a good practice, or is it something that is developed that we should try and get rid of?
Yeah, I think that the reason behind that was the foundation of it was good, but it may have reflected the reality of days gone by. The reason why investments were required to be proximal to the investors was set so that the investors could give help, guidance, and counsel to those investments. And that was most easily done, of course, by meeting people face to face rather than connecting with them over the telephone. So for any startup, the most important input into it is actually the guidance. It's not the money. Money is a commodity. You can get money anywhere. And in fact, if money were the only thing you need to have a successful startup, you'd be better off getting that money from a bank, right? So the most important thing any startup can get is not the money, but the guidance. How do you make the right decisions? And in the past, these right decisions were meted out most effectively by face-to-face meetings, hence this requirement to be geographically co-located. But maybe what we're finding out through the dynamic now under COVID-19 is that we can have really good relationships and have opportunities to provide that really good guidance completely over virtual means, maybe just as we're doing now here over the podcast. So if it's possible to give guidance and counsel, give that most important ingredient to startup success via virtual mechanisms like video conferencing, then great. It doesn't matter where that startup may reside. We can optimize and make decisions just based on the best teams and the best ideas, not on the quote unquote best location.
Shomit, I can't resist the temptation of asking you another question. And I know I'm going off script again. Something I'm personally really curious about and interested about is venture investing models. And so venture capital is arguably one of them that has deserved most recognition and actually had most impact, but it's not the only one. And even within the VC model, so to speak, we've seen some new kind of creative nuances to it to try to further align, for example, interests between founders and investors. And so my question is actually, have you seen anything that's made you particularly excited? Is there anything out there that you think is actually interesting, or do you think that the VC model is solid and here to stay?
Yeah, the VC model has been really effective and no doubt will continue to be effective because it's a way of providing risk-tolerant capital. And this is what startups need, is risk-tolerant capital, where if things succeed, great. If things don't succeed, the company goes out of business and the entrepreneur may have to find a new job, but they're not left to having to repay a loan or something like that. So it's this risk tolerance that's made the model successful and so foundational in driving the modern world in which we live. That said, my view is, once again, that capital is great, but capital is a commodity, and you know how I feel about commodities, and it's about anti-commodities where success lies. And anti-commodity here would be good guidance. It's being able to provide the counsel to make the right decisions as a startup. Because in a startup, it's a situation where even the smallest miscalculation will lead to failure. So you need to optimize constantly for making the right decisions given all the circumstances around you. So, guidance is what wins. So maybe if we look beyond the definition of venture capital as being monetary capital and think of it as being the investment of intellectual capital, maybe that's where the future lies, of being able to optimize for not just the commodity of money, but being able to optimize for the anti-commodity of good guidance, and thinking about this in terms of, venture intellectual capital, not just venture monetary capital.
It's very interesting, Shomit. Shomit, we're coming up on the end of our talk here, so I would love to shift us into our segment of the quickfire round. It's, of course, a round where we ask you quick answer questions, and you have just a short 30 or 60 seconds for each one. Of course, you know us, we might dive into something, and you should be very welcome to do so as well. Are you ready for it?
I'm all set.
Good. First question, what would you personally like to change about VC in general? And if you would be willing to say so, what would you like to change in Europe?
Wow, that's a really great question. I think that we've talked about the need for venture capital to be global, for all of us to be able to think of in these global contexts. And so maybe what that comes down to is the need to be inclusive. We're facing these major challenges to the planet. We're also seeing major opportunities here for businesses. The only way for us to be able to identify what those are and also identify the best solutions and the best teams is to bring in that inclusivity. So, this is the thing I'd like to see, is that this cease to be a narrowly focused practice and have a broader aperture so that we can bring in some of this global genius that exists all around us.
Second question, Shomit. What would be your advice to VCs looking to establish a closer connection to the American VC industry?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I think this applies equally to American VCs wishing to have close connections with VCs elsewhere in the globe. It requires more than just the transaction. We need to get to know each other well before there's ever an investment in play. So we need to get to know each other so we know who may be congenial with us and when it comes to personality, who may have congruent views to us when it comes to investment and technology futures, things like that. And so that we also have relationships of trust in place. These things happen only through an investment of time. And so we need to have those deeper relationships. Otherwise, if we only view each other through the lens of doing a transaction, maybe it never culminates in being a productive enough relationship. So I guess my advice would be get to know each other and get to know each other in substance and do so well before an investment is in play.
And now, Shomit, of course, our final question and the one that I have been most exciting to hear your answer to, which is, of course, what can we expect in the future from Shomit and also ONSET Ventures? Because
there's so much to be done. And I think that there's so much intellectual wherewithal that can do it everywhere in the world. So, where I'd like to see myself going forward here is continuing to work with entrepreneurs and that next generation of entrepreneurs to help solve and address some of these challenges before us.
Shomit, I'm really happy with this episode. I really enjoyed talking with you. I'd like to thank you for your time. I hope that our podcast plays somewhat of a role in helping VCs across the globe to get to know each other. We're obviously focusing in Europe, but our main role is to foster the relationships also with other regions. And so thank you very much for your time here on the European VC.
It was entirely my privilege for being here. Thank you so much, and wishing you all success. I know it's going to do good things.
This was our interview with Shomit Ghose, General Partner of ONSET Ventures. If you want to see more from Shomit, follow him on LinkedIn.
That's all for today, and thanks for listening. The European VC is your go-to place for insights into the European VC industry. Visit theeuropeanvc.com to hear more from us, and feel free to suggest topics or guests for future episodes. We are always there for you.